be doing my midterm review video on loops. So loops are essentially when you want to execute a certain block of code repeatedly. You can use them for many different things. And here's a simple example from 4.1 in the Zybox textbook that really shows how a loop works. So in this example, there's a baby that's awake and the parents wanted to fall asleep. And they're doing this by going around a block right here, which is basically the same thing as a loop. And they're going to go around this block for as many times as it takes for the baby to fall asleep. So we start off with the condition true or false. Is the baby awake? And if it's true, then it'll go around the block. And for any type of loop, it will execute as long as the condition is true. And as soon as the condition becomes false, then the loop will stop and it will terminate. So let's start this example. So the car goes to this checkpoint here. And is the baby awake or is it asleep? And it's true that it's awake. So it goes around the block. And it goes back to this spot where it started, at this checkpoint here. And so it's going to check again. Is it true that the baby is awake or is it false? And it happens to be true again this time. And so it goes around the block and goes back to the initial spot. So now it's going to do it again because it keeps going until it becomes false. And this time it became false. So now it will terminate. There are two different types of loops. We have the for loop and the while loop. The for loop is more like when you know how many times you want to go around the block, for example, and a while loop just is when you don't really know how many times you want to go around. The while loops I like and I use a lot more than for loops, but it's obviously your own personal opinion on how they work. So we'll start with the for loop. In a for loop, I'm going to section 4.12, which just has examples, and I'm going to go to the last example, which uses for loops here. For a for loop, we have three parts: the initialization, the condition, and the increment or decrement. So to start off with initializing, we have this variable right here, and we initialize it to starting annual salary, which in this code right here is something that the user inputs. So that was initializing. Then we have the condition, which is right here, and it's always in brackets beside the for or the while, just like the word there. And this condition right here is as long as the annual salary is less than or equal to the ending annual salary, the ending annual salary being something else that the user inputs. And then we have the increment or decrement. In this case, it's an increment because of the plus sign. We have the annual salary, whatever it was, then we add the income increment to that. So this for loop, the entire thing will execute as long as this condition is true right here. And as soon as the condition becomes false, the loop will stop running and we'll move on to the rest of the code. So in this example, the starting annual salary is $40,000. The ending annual salary is $60,000. And the income increment is $2,500. So this loop will keep adding $2,500 to $40,000 until that number equals $60,000. And in that case, the loop will terminate. In a while loop, for example, you can do the same thing in a while loop, plus you can do a little more. That's why I like them a lot better. In a while loop, it just has like a true and false condition. And as long as the condition is true, then the loop will keep executing. So in this case, we have a while loop inside a while loop. So the condition right here is the annual salary is greater than 0. And as long as the annual salary is greater than 0, the loop will execute. In this case, the annual salary is something that the user inputs. So as long as the user inputs an integer that's a positive integer, this while loop will execute. Then within this while loop, we have another while loop with a very similar condition as long as one deduction is greater than 0. Which is something that the user inputs once again. So I'll start off with this code, or this while loop, because it's a lot smaller. So we have the condition right here, and we have an increment, or just something that it changes every time the loop goes. It changes something or adds something, or it just does something every single time it loops around. So in this case, we have total deductions, and then we add one deduction to that. And at the end of the loop, the user is able to input another number for one deduction. And as long as they input something that is greater than 0, this loop will keep executing. As long as they input 0 or any negative integer, then the loop will stop, and it will go back to the greater loop because it still has the rest of the loop to execute in this case. And if you see at the top here, the condition is annual salary, and at the bottom of the loop, we have a spot for the user to input another annual salary too. So as long as they input something that is greater than 0, the loop will keep executing. So that was just a summary of for loops and while loops, and kind of like the difference between them. They can both be used interchangeably in many different cases. But if you're ever like stuck on what loop you should be using, it's always safe to go with while loop because in that case, like for loops, for example, you can't do as many things with. So if you aren't sure of what loop to use, just go with the while loop and it'll save you.
And if it's any form of stress reliever, you can make a major gerbils. They're very cute. This is Lucy right here, and the gray one is Remy. They love gerbils. Yeah. I hope this makes you smile, and good luck on your exam.